Hello and welcome to the HIV Cure podcast, an exciting season where we are going to be breaking the HIV cure from a pod to explain and help you understand better HIV cure research and also what's happening around when it comes to research. Where are we now? How far are we from the cure and where the cure is? Because it's something that's very, very interesting and people have questions, and we're here to just help you understand on where we are as Africa, as the world, and also understand the limitations that are there. And today we're going to be understanding HIV and the basics of HIV cure. And here basically we're just going to explain what HIV is, how it affects the body, and what researchers mean by an HIV cure. And of course, I have an exciting lineup of guests that I'll be interviewing during this first season of the HIV Cure podcast. And with me today, I have a very, very young, yes, I will be bringing young guests to talk to us, to explain to us using simple language. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Sakabo. Thanks for having me. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much. And thank you for making time to record this podcast with me.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to talk about it anytime.
All right. So kindly just introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Dr. Sherazaan Ismail. I am a senior scientist at the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology at the offices based in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm an HIV cure researcher. I started my journey into HIV cure research when I started my PhD in 2016, so that's quite a while back. And at that point in time, we were kind of just looking to, starting to understand how we can potentially cure HIV. And so, I've been involved in cure research this entire time, first at the University of Cape Town and now at the ICTV.
All right. Thank you so much. So we know that people make assumptions when it comes to HIV is and AIDS and all, but while in actual fact they don't. And there's also a lot of myths and misconceptions that are there. So to just start off the conversation, can you just kindly explain what HIV is and how it differs from the other viruses in terms of how it affects the body?
Sure. So we know, or at least the majority of us know, that HIV is a virus. And viruses differ from other infections in that, in one way, and that's that they are very specific. And it kind of works like a lock and a key. So each virus can infect a very specific cell type or specific cells that this lock can fit into. And so how HIV differs is that it has a key to infect our immune systems in our bodies that are responsible for fighting infection and protecting our bodies from invading pathogens or organisms. Right. So that's what our immune system does. It basically is able to identify things that do not look like ourselves. And HIV is able to infect these cells. So that's kind of a little bit about how it differs. I think that's quite a broad question, but I think that leads on into like a bigger discussion that we can have next.
Yes, and you were talking about how the body is able to just detect that there's like a foreign body. So then how does HIV attack the immune system, and why are CD4 cells important in this whole process?
Right. So if we continue with this lock and key analogy, so HIV has this key, right, to enter the cells in our immune system, and specifically HIV's main target is CD4 T cells. And when the virus enters these cells, it makes use of our cells' machinery to produce more of itself, because ultimately the virus needs to survive, right? And doesn't have all of its own tools to do so. So it makes use of our cells' machinery to do that. And very often, what results is that the viruses that bud out of these cells end up killing the new, killing the cells that it has infected to make new copies of itself. So just to kind of translate this into real world stuff, we see evidence of this replication in the viral loads that we can measure in the blood. So initially in those first couple of weeks, after a person has acquired HIV, the viral load can be measured in the blood because the virus is replicating so rapidly at the beginning. And then you see this also in the decline in CD4 count because the virus is killing the CD4 T cells that it is able to get into. Why this is important for our immunity is that CD4 T cells are critical for our immunity. It's their normal function in our bodies is to protect us from pathogens. So their other name is T helper cells. They help our bodies recognize non-self, so these invading pathogens. And so as these CD4 T cells die, our bodies become more susceptible to infection because these protectors aren't there in high enough numbers anymore. And this is how immunodeficiency develops. And in the case of HIV, this has been termed acquired immune deficiency syndrome or AIDS.
Okay, so when I was diagnosed with HIV back in 2003, it was a time that was very scary because during those times people were literally dying of AIDS, and we didn't know exactly what HIV and AIDS was, and people had there was so much fear, and also the medication, starting medication, it was just a whole new thing. But we've also seen how ARVs have worked over the years, where people were even able to to just rise from their deathbeds, and that some of them are still alive currently. And now I want to know the difference now between HIV and AIDS, because we take it for granted, but you find that a lot of people don't know the difference between HIV and AIDS, and why it's important to actually know the difference between the two.
Right. So I think I'll start off with a little bit about why it's important to distinguish between the two. And I think it's in kind of what you said leading up to this is like there's a lot of fear around, or well, I'm hoping that the fear is lessening over time the more we learn. But that's how we combat fear, right? Is the more you know, the more you're able to strengthen your resolve against these things. So we use HIV to refer to the virus itself. It's the name of the virus. And AIDS we use when we refer to the progression of disease, where a person becomes immune deficient after they had acquired HIV. So this means that AIDS refers to the condition of immune systems not being able to fight off infections as well as they did before. And so before the discovery of antiretrovirals, living with HIV meant the eventual progression to AIDS. And so people tended to use the terms interchangeably. So if somebody had acquired HIV, there were a lot of stigmatizing terms that were flying around back then. People were referred to as AIDS patients, etc. But now we know that this is not the case. So since the advent of antiretrovirals, living with HIV does not necessarily mean that you're going to progress to AIDS. Being on treatment means that you can live a long and healthy life. And so those terms should not be used interchangeably. They are not the same thing. You're correct.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I think that people think that because HIV has been there for such a long time, for almost 40 years, people just interchangeably just use the words living with HIV. They tend to say, oh, you have AIDS, which is not the case. And also that also sort of stigmatizes and people that have HIV. And also you find that when people now hear that, oh, you have AIDS, there's also that sort of fear attached to that, like, oh, she's about to die, or she's about to infect us. So just thank you for clarifying that. And talking about having had HIV and AIDS for over 40 years, in for over 40 years, there's also that thing or that assumption, or not really assumption, but that thing or that curiosity to say that no, we've had HIV for a very long time, for 40 years, and then we still don't have a cure yet. But we've had COVID for just a couple of years, couple of months, and we are busy with functional vaccines, and people now we are COVID free. How is it possible that to this day we still haven't found an HIV cure? So I would just like to know the concept of sterilization cure as well as functional cure. But before that, just explain to us what we mean by an HIV cure, and do we have an HIV cure currently?
Right. So, I'm gonna answer the last question first. We do not have an HIV cure currently. It is ongoing work. There is still a lot of work to be done in the field. But that's not to say that we shouldn't have hope that a cure is possible and that it's something that we will achieve. And so, without going too much into the detail, because I think that might come later, we refer to two different kinds of cures because since we don't have a cure yet, we don't necessarily know what it's going to look like. But there are two ways that we could potentially achieve a cure. And we refer to these, as you mentioned, as a sterilizing cure or a functional cure. So functional cure means that we are not necessarily getting rid of all of the HIV in the body, but we are breaking it down to such a point that the HIV cannot function anymore. So it will not be able to replicate itself or cause any kind of viral rebound if anybody living with HIV who is suppressed on therapy comes off of treatment. So basically, the idea behind a functional cure is rendering HIV non-functional so that it cannot replicate and cause illness. In theory, if this had to happen in people, this means that they could potentially go off of treatment for a very long period of time or potentially forever without the virus rebounding and causing disease. And so this is a really great option if we are not able to achieve a sterilizing cure. But obviously, first prize would be to get rid of all the HIV, eliminate all of the HIV in a body, so that we are completely sure that HIV can no longer go on to cause disease.
Okay, so then why is it, or what makes it so challenging to completely eliminate HIV from the body?
Okay, so this is going to require a little bit of biology digging, and so if you are not super interested in the in-depths of the biology, maybe a little bit boring, but let's go ahead. Okay, so each of the cells that make up our body contains DNA, right? And this DNA is basically the instructions on how our body should function, what it should look like. It dictates all of those things. And every single cell has your DNA in it. It's very unique to you, but also there's similarities across humans, across different species as well. That being said, when HIV gets into the body, it enters the cell, but not only that, it doesn't just stop there. What it does is it makes a copy of itself and basically cuts and inserts itself into our DNA. So it just makes, if you think about taking a pair of scissors, cutting a piece of string, and then tying a different piece of string in the middle of those two pieces, that's what HIV does. So it inserts itself into our DNA. And basically when that happens, HIV is not the only virus that does this, by the way, but when that happens, it's very difficult to get rid of it because we are targeting this small little piece of HIV DNA that's in amongst all of our DNA. And it's very difficult to do that without damaging our own DNA and causing, we call it off-target effects. So if your target is HIV, there might be targets that are off of that target that some kind of treatment could end up targeting inadvertently. And so this is how HIV manages to hide from a lot of our very sophisticated techniques. And yeah, so there's other mechanisms that it also uses that is important in our body's biology that can silence the HIV from being expressed. But yeah, we can get into the details, I think, a little bit later, but that's basically it integrates into our DNA and it hides there.
Okay, and then earlier on, I talked about how ARVs have worked over the years, and we've seen people, people who were very, very sick back then, around in the early 2000s, they were sick, and then after taking ARV for some time, they were fine, the healthy people now. So when it comes to antiretroviral therapy, what role do they play when it comes to managing HIV, and how is it different from curing HIV, or why do ARVs not cure HIV?
Right. So just keep in the back of your mind that we mentioned a sterilizing and a functional cure, right? So
Yeah.
sterilizing would be to get rid of all of the HIV, and functional would be to just disable it in a way, or render it non-functional, basically. And so because HIV is integrated into your cells, DNA, this becomes very difficult. How ARVs work is basically it stops replication of the virus. So it doesn't stop the integration of HIV. It can't cut out the HIV from our DNA. It can't do any of that. How it works is that it works at different sections of HIV's life cycle. So there are ARVs that are not currently used in people that target entry into the cell. There are ARVs that target into licensed and they are used in people living with HIV. There are ARVs that target reverse transcription and basically HIV making more copies of itself. So there's different steps at which each of these different ARVs can function. And we generally use them in combination with each other, which is why we have combination antiretroviral therapy, because this most effectively blocks HIV replication. But that being said, all that does is it suppresses the viral load. So it stops HIV from damaging your immune system, basically, and leaves it just quietly lying there in your cells. But we all know that for the majority of people on antiretroviral therapy, people who are living with HIV, if they stop taking their treatment, that viral load rebounds. And this is because the drug is no longer present and can no longer work to block HIV replication. So in the case of antiretroviral therapy, it's beautifully effective at controlling HIV, but it does not eliminate it. And so the minute that it is gone, your virus is going to rebound.
Okay, you explained how ARVs work and their effectiveness. So then, since we have something effective that's working for people that are living with HIV, in terms of managing HIV, why is it important then for us to have HIV cure research when we already have something that's very effective?
Right, that's a great question. Well, first of all, I think it's important that we have options, right? And one of the main things that have been mentioned time and time again is the fact that you still have to take medication every single day to prevent HIV from rebounding. And this, while it has gone down from taking a whole handful of pills every day to now being able to take one pill and hopefully very soon, one injection twice a year, it's still something that you have to commit to lifelong if you are living with HIV. And that can become tiresome and burdensome, and it can sometimes get in the way of life. And so If we are able to cure HIV, then I think we should have that option available to people. Yeah, options are very important. It also, there is a financial role that it would play in that, can be very costly. It's costly to individuals, it's costly to governments, and if we can free up resources that can be used elsewhere by making a cure available, then that's also very important. We need to do. So those are my thoughts on it for now.
Okay, yes, I think honestly, so from my point of view as a
Yeah.
person living with HIV and HIV cure, honestly, I'm like I'm waiting for it. I'm like, listen, any day call me when you find it because I believe that is going to be a game changer in terms of just how we're living our lives, like you explained earlier on that when it comes to antiretrovirals, this is like a lifetime commitment. And also
Mm-hmm.
you find that some like going into relationships and you're living with HIV, it's hard, and also with the cost that is costing our government. So if we do find a cure, it'll help a lot with also just diversifying our funds to other stuff in the economy instead of just
Mm-hmm.
having our money go for antiretroviral procurement. So it's something that that's why I tend to like get excited when I'm talking about HIV cure, or I advocate for it or want to teach people in platforms like this so that they get to understand and also have a voice or have a point where they can advocate for HIV cure, because a lot of people think that when you're talking of HIV cure, you have to be a scientist or you have to be into the sciences, but they should be understanding the different points or the different benefits of why an HIV cure is important and why they should understand and talk about it. So such platforms like this here is one of the ways where we are simplifying and just trying to empower people also to know of what is happening and all that. And then still when we're talking about HIV cure, there's also a lot of myths and misconceptions with that. So can you just please, if there are any misconceptions about HIV and AIDS that need to be addressed when we're talking about HIV cure, can you please just share with us?
Sure. Before I do that, I hope that I can just add something to what you said earlier. So,
Yes.
while this conversation around cure is happening, and you mentioned that people think that they need to be a scientist to have a discussion around cure, right? I mentioned earlier that we are still unsure what an effective cure is going to look like because we're still busy with the research, right? And at this point, it's not just a conversation that has to happen amongst scientists. It needs to happen amongst all stakeholders that you know can benefit from an HIV cure. First and foremost, people living with HIV. And
Yeah.
so, if people have an idea of what they want a cure to look like, for instance, would you prefer it be something that you could take once off? Would you prefer it be something that you don't have to go into the clinic for administration, for, all of these things are important for us to discuss before the time. How do you envision an HIV cure coming about or looking, for instance? And I mean, it's important for us to have these discussions, not just among scientists. So yeah, there's that. Have these discussions with your families and friends about what it would look like. Have these discussions. It builds the conversation. So some of the
Yeah.
misconceptions about HIV and AIDS. Again, I'm going to make the point that we don't know what a cure looks like as yet. We have a couple of ideas about what potentially might be effective, but without actually testing these first in preclinical settings and then in a clinical setting, we are not going to know, and that's still a couple of years off. Um, I think. And so, yeah, the first thing is that a cure is not yet available. So if anybody is approaching you and saying, look, we have a cure for HIV, that's absolutely not the case.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be wary of people trying to take advantage of you if that is the case. Um, And then the other thing is that we don't know if the cure is going to be a functional cure or a sterilizing cure. Um, so in the case of a sterilizing cure, that's first prize. It's really great. Perhaps no other intervention required after that. So once we've managed to achieve a sterilizing cure in somebody, then that's it. They can go off treatment and potentially carry on with their lives. With a functional cure, um, just depending on how effective the functional cure is, it might mean that somebody can be off of treatment for only a short period of time, 2 years, and then have to reinitiate upon rebound. Um, Maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. So there's a lot of questions around functional cure that we can't answer as yet either.
All right. And then now when you're talking about the just breaking down some of the misconceptions that are there, we know that scientists, researchers, are busy in labs, are busy writing papers, updating us, looking at what is happening. So now we want to know that as you're working towards an HIV cure, what are some of the key questions that researchers are trying to answer as they work towards achieving an HIV cure for all?
Right. So I think the first question is, what do we know about the reservoir? And that's, I think, where most of the research has been going, is just understanding the reservoir. And when I talk about the reservoir, it's defined as all of the HIV in an individual. And so it is the cells that the virus is hiding in. It's the different kinds of viruses within an individual and exactly where in the body they are. So we refer to this collectively as the reservoir. And basically how these viruses are characterized is that when somebody living with HIV who is on treatment and virally suppressed eventually comes off of treatment, virus rebounds, those viruses that are able to cause viral rebound are referred to as the reservoirs. Basically the viruses that are hiding in the body that need to be cured. And so the questions we've been asking around that is, which cells make up the reservoir? What do the reservoir viruses look like? How do they behave? Do they behave similarly or different to each other? How diverse are they amongst individuals living with HIV? How are they able to evade the immune system and hide for such a long period of time? And how do these variants survive in people on treatment? So, there've been people who have been on treatment for 20 years or more who experience viral rebound when they stop treatment. And so one of the important questions is, how do these viruses survive for 20 years in an individual? There's also broader questions like what's the impact of sex hormones and lifestyle or metabolism, nutrition, etc. on the reservoir. We are starting to answer those questions now too. And then also, how does host genetic background and viral subtype influence the reservoir? Which is one of the questions that I'm personally working on. And so, I'm unsure how many people are aware, but there are different viral subtypes. And so you have HIV subtype B that's predominant in North America and Europe. We have HIV subtype C that's predominant in South Africa and India. And then we have different subtypes that are predominant in different countries, with some countries having more diversity in the viral subtypes that are circulating in the population. And so we don't yet know if studies that have been done in subtype B viruses are directly applicable to what we see in subtype C or subtype D, for instance, of HIV. And so this research is currently happening. There are many researchers taking on these questions. So just in a nutshell, what that last question would answer is, if we do develop a cure, will it be broadly applicable? And so the one thing that's important in this research is equity. If a cure is not equitable and not able to be effective across everyone living with HIV, then, we need to work towards achieving something that is equitable and accessible for everybody. There's a lot of research going into that as well. And then on the other side of things, there are people who are developing cure strategies already. So there's all these treatments that have been developed over the years. For instance, the use of broadly neutralizing antibodies, which is something that I'm sure people have heard the term flying around out there. And so broadly neutralizing antibodies are something that's produced by bodies naturally. It's something that we think we can take advantage of to stimulate these broadly neutralizing antibodies in everyone, because at the moment they're only naturally produced by about 10 to 30% of individuals, depending on where you look. And we kind of want to see if we can stimulate those responses in more individuals, people who wouldn't normally go on to produce broadly neutralizing antibodies. So there are strategies like that that are being investigated in the lab. So currently in preclinical and maybe like early clinical studies, to see how effective broadly neutralizing antibodies are. I think we've kind of just scraped the surface of this. I don't know how much time we have left to chat about this, but there's a whole bunch of cure research that's happening at the moment. That's very exciting. And I would encourage people to look into it. Just, a quick Google. There's a lot of resources out there for communities to access. I'm sure you'd be able to share some of them as well.
Yes. Wow, what a way to start off the season. Thank you so much for explaining and just also kind of like building on the curiosity. And all these questions will be answered as time goes on here in different episodes where we're going to be answering some of the questions that you've addressed and just sort of like shown us that it's HIV cure research and aspects to it. And I'm looking forward to just going on and explaining or teaching and empowering people of what is happening in terms of research information, because sometimes also it's very difficult to read up stuff on your own or to try and find out what is happening. So through this platform, we will be bringing more and more episodes to share and bring some of the answers some of the answers to the questions that you may have or you may be having, or from this episode now you want to know more. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing all this information.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have been on the podcast. This is very important work that you are doing, and I'm very humble and grateful to have been a part of this. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. And please join us for our next episode coming soon, where we are going to be expanding and learning more from the HIV Cure podcast and answering some of the questions that we did discuss today. Until next time, goodbye.